Sheets session. I'm Poe, or Poe, but I go by Poe. I'm the Data and Assessments Manager at DC International School. I am going into my 4th year at DCI as a Data and Assessments Manager. My background is actually in teaching middle school math. And then prior to that was a DC Teaching Fellow and did my master's at American University and got my master's in public administration and policy. So yeah, I'm here because I just really like data and realized that I actually really like working out of Excel and Google Sheets and actually like putting data together and making it useful for teachers and leaders. So I exited the classroom because I found that like my interest and skill would probably be more helpful outside of it. All right, so our agenda today, go through some just examples of how I've used querying in Google Sheets. We're going to talk about the import range function, naming ranges, and then we're going to go through the actual, like all the query functions and going through step by step, and then at the end, questions. This session is a little shorter than I usually do, so we're gonna probably move a little quickly through, and the setup will be like, I'll do an example for each of the items, and then there's also an example that we'll kind of try together. If you are able to, you might want to set up your screen. If you only have one screen, set up like a side-by-side version where you can actually like see the slides or even a copy of the slides so that you can see what examples we're working through, and then the actual Google Sheet that you'll be working out of. If you have multiple screens, then you'll want to have one screen set up with the slides and then the other screen set up with the Google Sheet. Also, oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and you might at some points want to go full screen. So you should see that at the top of your screen for the Whova if you're not already in full screen. This is going to be pretty interactive, so you're going to want to see as big as you can and show if you hover over the video, if you're just in the Whova window, the full screen option comes up.
Yeah, and like I said, if you don't have both things open at the same time, that's also okay. Like I said, I'm going to go through like one example together, and then the other one will give some time for you to work through on your own a little bit. And so you could just like go back and forth between tabs if need be. And so, right, why Google Sheets? Also, just a note for this session, you have to be using Google Sheets. This is not, the query function does not work in Excel. It is a solely Google Sheets function, so make sure you have access to that. But why Google Sheets, right? If your school or your organization is like mine, we work solely out of Google Sheets. It's easy to share, right? We're Google School. And so I've tried just looking through a lot of different like Google functions to try to make my life a little easier. And so some examples of me using querying in Google Sheets. So we have a teacher support and coaching feedback form that teachers fill out. And what our principal had asked me to do was that she wanted reports for each of the different like coaches, but while protecting their own individual data because they don't want everyone to see everyone's, right, feedback. So you can actually use query to then draw out the specific coaches you want and then share individually with each of them instead of copying and pasting. The benefit of querying here is then that every time the form gets updated, it automatically updates onto that coach's individual Google Sheet. And so this is one example of that. Another is that we have an SST data sheet. So we compile all this information on all of our students. That includes really everything that we can, attendance, academics, what courses they're in, interventions and whatnot. And so being able to use query for that to pull information out for specific people is also really helpful. Academic interventions, again, taking information like from SST and pulling out specific column, specific information from it. And then recently we actually used, because, you know, we're on the tail end of enrollment season now, but like pulling out information for enrollment easily so that our teams can actually see like who's completed everything, who hasn't, and then where they can pinpoint specific things they need to do. All right, so some goals for this session. We're going to connect some sheets using import range, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is. Learn the basic commands of query. If you've done SQL, if you've used SQL, all of these are the same. They're just going to look a little bit different because they're in Google Sheets. And then we're going to practice some. And like I said, the format is I'm going to show you an example, and then we're going to try one together. And so other things, right, as we go through, just some norms, right? Please chat in the Whova app. That is where we'll be checking for questions and whatnot. Also, I have this little, my Bitmoji there. Feel free to like jump in if there are questions on there, right? And for you to share like how you're doing on the examples, feel free to chat. Answers those questions, or if you just have questions in general and need me to slow down and whatnot, you can also chat in the app. And so based on the examples, like if anyone immediately right now, like if you have any examples of how you envision how to use query, you can go ahead and also chat that in to the chat box, just so we can see like, and everyone can gather like what different ideas you have on how you might want to use this. Also, I'm sorry, I forgot one thing. If you have a question and maybe busy and or won't make sense in the chat box, you can also unmute yourself and ask the question as well. If you, while you're not talking though, we are asking everyone to just mute, stay on mute, and then if you have a question or comment or something, you can go ahead and unmute.
And just a quick reminder, we're using the chat in the Whova app, and it's to the right of the session Q&A. You just have to click on chat.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. The first one is called import range. I'm not sure how many people have actually used import range, but a really nice thing about import range is that you can take data that you already have in one sheet and actually automatically import it into a new sheet, and then it'll automatically update on its own. So if you have a master spreadsheet, let's say your attendance data that you continuously update, then you can actually import that into a different sheet that you know you'll use for, and then it'll automatically update once you refresh the original sheet. So instead of just like copying, pasting every single time, you can use import range to just get automatic updates for that. And so what I'm going to ask everyone to do is you're going to have the sample data open, because we are going to actually import that sample data into a new spreadsheet that you're going to be working off of. And so you should see in the folder, there's one that's just called the data set. You're going to go ahead and make sure you open that one. And then you're also going to open up a new blank sheet, and you can label it whatever you want so that you can keep it clear. I just labeled it with my name, practice sheet, and that's where we'll be working off of. And so in that data set, you should only see 4 tabs at the bottom. Yeah. Okay, so we're actually going to import the math with info and reading with info into your new spreadsheet. And if you have trouble with import range today, it's okay. Also in the folder, you'll find a data set that's already with the import range. And so you could actually just make a copy of that data set with import range and then be able to still move forward with this. And so some things to keep in mind about import range and the syntax for it is that it is the URL of the spreadsheet, and then also the sheet name and all the columns that you want. And so in this example, what we're gonna have is actually, we'll import the math with info, and I need to go ahead and copy that whole entire URL in to my practice sheet. And so I'm going to start with equals and then import range. And both of these sections are going to need the quotation marks in it. And so I'm going to start with an open quote, copy in that URL, close it, comma, and then now I need the name of the sheet with that open quotation mark again. And in this case, it's math with info. And you need to type it exactly as shown. And for any sheet, once you type the tab in, do an exclamation mark. And we're going to go columns A through U. Close quotation, and then your parenthesis. You're going to get this reference here. Once you hover over it, you're going to allow access. Once you have that, you're actually now going to see an exact copy, right, of what you saw in the original data set of math with info. And so you can actually relabel this so that we can keep it clear here. A note about import range. Once you copy it over, you can't change anything within this. If you try to edit a cell within that import range, it's actually going to delete the whole thing. Pros and cons with this. The pro is that if you're just sharing information with someone, then they can't actually mess up any of the data. The con is if they actually need to make edits, they won't be able to. So I'm going to actually give you a second to import over now that reading with info tab. I'm going to keep this up. Like I said, copy the URL, and then also you'll see on the screen it is reading with info, exclamation mark, and then columns A through U. We'll go ahead and take a minute to import. Actually, you'll want to import both because we'll need to work off of both. And again, if you have trouble with that, go ahead and just open up the data set with import range, and you can make a copy of that and use that one.
And that should already be in the folder that's in the folder that you downloaded and copied over.
Okay, so once you get to that reference part, hover over that cell, and then a window will pop up that says allow access. And then it should only pop up the one time. And then once you try to import the other tab, because you've already allowed access to that sheet, it should work. And so, like I said, you should see exact copies of the data set. Once you've imported both tabs over, or if you've actually just made a copy of the with import range, then go ahead and actually, you can close out the data set window. Because we won't need that anymore. We're just going to work on your own practice sheet. All right, so we're gonna keep moving just because we have a lot of information to get through. And again, if you have problems with that, go ahead and just make a copy of the one with import range. Also, I forgot to mention in the drive, there is an answer key as well. And in the answer key, which I will show you right now, for each of the slides, I like titled what it would be named in the answer key tab. So even after the session is over and you want to reference some things or you're having trouble while like working on something on your own, you can go back to each of these and actually pair it with whichever one is in the slide. And most of the time in A1 is where that query function will be for you to reference back. All right, so for those who have done, right, I've used SQL before, SQL just stands for Structured Query Language. It is for you to like trove through databases like worth of information and to get different things. Querying in Google Sheets, not as sophisticated as SQL, but it does get some of the work done. If you aren't able to use SQL, like my school, we can't hook up to our SIS because we are an eSchool, so we're not able to actually automatically do hookups through there. And so I use a lot of querying through after some manual downloads. All right, so the commands in query are the same as in SQL, right? It's select, where, order by, limit, and label. And just a reminder for everyone, the commands are always used in this order. You can't do order by before you do select or anything like that while doing in the query. And also in the drive, you will actually find a reference sheet. And so you can always keep this on hand along with the slides that will give you, right, just some quick points in what the syntax is for each. And also, if you don't have something like this, I also put in this column letter and column number. And so this is useful, right, when you're doing like VLOOKUPs and whatnot. Sometimes it's going to be helpful with this work as well. I just have a laminated version on my, like right by my desk, so super helpful.
So with that one, you have to, it works the best if your data is all starting in that first column, right?
Mm-hmm. If you're doing, yeah, things from column A. All right, next step is we're going to name the range. We need to name the range to set us up for querying because as we type the formulas in, we actually have to like type in that shortcut name. So right now I'm going to have you select all the columns, or I'm going to show you, and we're going to do both of these. You're going to select all the columns in the Math with Info. And a shortcut here is in that top left corner, selecting all of them. We're going to go to Data in the top menu, go to Named Ranges. And we're just going to name this range in that box Math. And you should see that it's the whole thing, the whole sheet, or the whole tab, sorry, and then hit Done. And you'll see that that Math tab is named. Go ahead and do that for Math and for Reading. We're going to name the reading one, Reading. And sorry, if you copied the import range, you're still going to do this step because that was not done yet in the copy of with the import range done. And so then go ahead for Math and for Reading, go ahead and name both those ranges real quick. I'm going to do both for Reading. So again, click on all of or the entire sheet. You can go name ranges again. We'll label it Reading. Hit Done. And then now you should see Math and Reading as both of your named ranges. right. And once you have that done, you can actually exit out of that named range bar. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started on the select query. And so this is actually just selecting which columns you want returned in that sheet and in what order. If you're a SQL user, you'll know that like select star is going to select everything coming from that range. And so we're actually going to start with that. The syntax for a query, you're always going to have range. And so in this case, we're using math or reading. And then in the middle, in the quotation marks is where your SQL code is going to go. And then in this case, we're going to do a comma 1 at the end. And so in this example, we're going to create a new sheet for our first select star. I'm going to start with equals query, oops, and actually spell it correctly. And then math, comma, and then select star. And that's where I'm going to end it with a comma 1. And again, right now, at the beginning, you're going to see another just copy of that math with info in there. Once you select everything, that whole sheet is going to come through. Let's go ahead, and if you are just listening, you can pull up your practice sheet and go ahead and do that for the math. And actually, we can also go ahead together and do for the reading, and we'll have again equals query. Reading. And just a reminder in Google Sheets, right, if it matches to something, it's going to light up, right, that color, so you know that you're actually referencing something correctly. Let's start. See copies of both. All right, hopefully you've done one or the other just to practice a little bit. So now let's go into actually, let's say we don't actually want to select the whole entire sheet, right? And we only want specific columns because we're sharing this with someone. So let's say we only want to select the columns with student name, the grade, the teacher, and their winter map percentage. I need to first identify what those columns are in the math tab. And so if I go over to the math with info, right, I can see that student name is in column C. So I know I'm going to be pulling that over. And I forgot to mention at home, right, if you have pen and paper, this would also be really helpful for you to just jot these things down as we're going through, but they're also in the slides. Student name is in C. We have grade, right, which is in D. Teacher, here in this case, H. And then our winter map percentage is in L. And so now back to this. We are going to add in select, and instead of star, we're going to put in these actual column into the query. So I'll show you guys, we have equals query, and then from the map, select, and then C, D, H, and L with commas in between all of those. And so now you should only see those 4 columns instead of all the columns like the previous example when we did select star. I'm going to have you guys go ahead and practice with the reading sheet. And so create a new tab. And what we want to do is actually select the student name, grade, teacher, the winter map percentage, And then I've added on actually also the growth percentile here. And just for some participation in the chat box, if you would like to tell us what those columns are, that would be great. Wonderful. We have a couple people. And you are looking for CDHLNN. Yep, NN. So go ahead and select those into your new tab. All right, and we have a question. If you update something in the original doc, will it auto update in the query data set? Yes. I might have to refresh the sheet, right? But right now, like everything is linked. So in your original doc where you're importing the information from, you'll then be able to, it'll automatically update there and then update into your query as well. Oh, and so the one at the end of the formula, and I think I've gotten this question just about every session, and I'm gonna lie to you, I can't remember my full answer, but
Does anyone else know the answer that they want to put in the chat before we share? I'm going to give you a few seconds to guess. I'm going to just say, so there are different things. You can either put a 0 or 1. If you put a 0, it's going to have like around that answer. If you put a 1, it'll come back with the exact answer. That's usually the 0 and 1.
oh, and then another question is how is query the same or different as VLOOKUP in Excel? So VLOOKUP I usually use, right, to pair different information together. So let's say I have, right, my attendance sheet. So whenever I export attendance out of Click, SLED, or eSchool, sometimes it has only student ID numbers on it, but I need to pair it with a name and some other information out of our SIS. And so VLOOKUPing is a good way to pair that information together. Query is a lot more times like either you're using it in SQL to aggregate information, especially out of a large database, but it's also looking up, like finding information and getting it into a new sheet perhaps. So querying, you're not necessarily pairing information together. You're going to use a sheet that already has all the information, and it's then almost filtering. So I would say querying is essentially more like filtering than VLOOKUP is. So hopefully that helps or answer the question. All right. Let me keep going. So the next then is where, and this is where we can start to actually only return rows that match a certain condition. And so this actually, the question actually was a good lead into this. So this is where you're going to start filtering information that you want and what you might want to share with people. So let's say your leadership is looking for, I just want the list of kids, right, who only had below a certain percentage or below a certain percentile on MAP. You can query that in there for them. And the nice thing about query is, again, just like import range, people can't really mess with the data. It's very much almost like a view only set of the data. All right, and so in this case, we're gonna start with, I'm gonna do the example for the math portion. And so we're gonna select this time student name, grade, teacher, the MAP percentage, and then their PARCC projection. But I only want the list of kids where PARCC is less than 3. And so I'm gonna identify what the columns are, which in this case is C, D, H, L, and S. And then where PARCC is less than 3, our PARCC projection column is in column S. Comparison operator, here's the less than, and then the criteria is 3. So I'm going to go over to my practice sheet. And type in the query, my range, which is math. I'm going to select only C, D, H, L, and S. After that S, you're not going to put a comma. You're actually going to type in where. In query, each time they see those words like select, where, order by, it already knows it's going to move on to the next thing. So you're going to put where, and then I'm going to say where S is less than 3. You can put spaces, you don't have to put spaces. It's up to you between all of those. The comma 1, close it. And so as you scroll through, you should then see in your, now in column E, list of PARCC projection, anything with less than 3. You are going to get blanks in here as well if we don't have data on that student. And so to get rid of that, you can actually put S is less than 3. And you can add on and say, and S is greater than 0. If you change that, it's going to get rid of the blanks for you in a cleaner, right, data set if you're sharing it with someone else. But it's up to you. Let's say you also want to know who we don't have data for, that would be useful. So I'm going to go ahead and have you try this, right? Now we're going to do the reading, and you're going to select name, grade, teacher, the MAP percentage, and the PARCC projection. And we're going to go and do this without the blanks as well. Maybe you go ahead and try that on your own. Okay. So in this case, the columns you're looking at C, D, H, L, and T this time. I'm going to say where T is less than 3 and T is greater than 0. And once you have that, you should see Aegon Frey in the first one with our PARCC projection of 2. Also, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, this was the easiest set of names I could pull. So here we are, a lot of Game of Thrones references. And if you scroll through as just a way to double check, you should only see, right, 1s and 2s in the PARCC projection without any blanks. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and show you, right, if you are actually then filtering, or the condition includes a text. So the way text works within the query is that you have to use single quotes within that text. And so in this case, let's say I only want teacher Jon Snow and his information on here. We are then going to start that query. In this case, again, back to the math one, C, D, H, L, and S. We're going to say where H is where the teacher column is, H equals, and then a single quotation mark, Jon Snow. You have to type it in exactly as shown. And so this is where making sure your data is clean is really helpful. And so now as a check, because I have that teacher column in there, I can see all the data here is only related to our teacher, Jon Snow. And so if you want to write, filter, or query a text, you can do that. Just remember the single quotes. Any questions so far on the select and where functions? Can I combine the two where statement in one query? Yes. Yeah, you'll go either use and or in any of those, and you can actually keep on combining for those. I will say, like, as you're working through them though, I would go like one at a time, right? Because sometimes if you like do too many at once and then an error kicks back, it's then like hard to figure out where the error occurred. So I would do like each of those one at a time. So the next is an order by. And so this then just helps you then put things in a specific order that you want. Because like I said, once you share this with someone, once you've done a query, you can't edit it. So I'm going to show you an example, right? Like if I decided to add a filter onto this sheet and I want to filter by that park projection, I can't do that in a manual filter because it has to be a part of the query. Okay. So if I want to order by, I am going to then type in the order by, whichever column, and we're talking about the original column it was in. So for example, right, teacher sits in actually column H in my original sheet. That is always going to be your reference, not where it sits in the new portion. And so I can add in an order by. Let's say order by ascending order by map percentage. And so my map percentage in the original sheet was an L. I'm going to go order by L, ascending. And that's going to change up my order for me, right? So now I have all my blinks here. And then in ascending order. A note about the ascending, descending, based on like what you want to pull out of it, because later you can actually then limit the data set to either, right, the top 10, the bottom 10, but you have to have it ordered correctly to get those in there. And because we have 15 minutes left, what I'm going to do is actually go through, right, the next couple steps and kind of skip a little bit of the practice and hopefully leave some time at the end, because I see a question about combining statements and I want to get to that maybe when we come back at the end. But order by is pretty simple. Just remember the ascending is ASC, descending is DESC. All right, so then like I said, we want to limit, right? Let's say we only want to limit to the top 10, right, list of kids in Jon Snow's class. I'm going to have to actually change this to descending to then get the top. I can add on to that limit 10. And that'll cut my list down to only the top 10. If you wanted the bottom 10, right, you can go ahead and change to ascending order and get only the top 10. All right, labeling. All right, so labeling, you can actually change the labels from your original sheet, right? And let's say like we know that it's going to be like people know that it is map data and it's a percentile. Let's say you want to change it and be like, oh no, this is our mid-year data, right? And that's not listed in the original sheet. After if you are using limit, right, the next is then going to be label. And so you can actually label whatever column you want and then whatever you want to relabel as. Again, in single quotes because we're working with text. And so I'm going to keep on adding on to this, and this time add in label. And I'm going to relabel my map percentage is in S. And so now you'll see, I'm sorry, I labeled the wrong column. That's the park percentage. I'm gonna go back one, L. Right. Now, instead of the map percentage, it says it's the MOY percent. All right. Last thing I do want to hit up is actually cell references and using them in query. What this means is that actually this is the portion where you can start maybe playing around with like building a dashboard. And that actually used to be originally a part of this session a little bit because it's shorter and we're doing virtually, we decided to take out the dashboard portion. But if you want to play around with this right after, you can then actually add in cell references. So then people can actually make edits and like change and filter for different things. So in this case, let's say you want to add in a cell reference so that people can search for different teachers' data, right? And pull that up. We're gonna replace Jon Snow with a cell reference. And so what I'm gonna do here is on this sheet, if I insert above, I can add in a space that says teacher, and then in this case, we'll do Jon Snow for now. Back in your query, if you go where H equals, we're going to do, and this is where it gets a little complicated in the query just because you have a lot of things going on when doing a cell reference. You're still going to keep that single quote because we're still referencing a text here, single quote, and then a double quotation mark, the ampersand, and then in this case, the actual cell itself, which is B1, and then we're going to mirror and close it off. And so in this case, when you're doing that cell reference, single quote, double quote, ampersand, the actual cell, and then mirroring that back. In this case, once you hit enter, it should be the same. But let's say I go back here and again, since it has to look exactly the same, I'm going to copy in Peter Baelish's name. Right? And now this is something that people can edit and pull up. I would say an additional add-on I would do is add a data validation on here with the actual teacher's name, and then people can actually pick from that drop-down menu and look for different information in there. You could also, if you're not doing text, do the same thing with like, you know, the actual percentage or a threshold for that number in the cell reference. And so then people could look for only, right, things that are below a certain point or that equals a certain percentage, etc.
Would you also protect the cells so that people wouldn't edit your formula?
You could, although if they, if they decide to edit it for their own use, you know, if they know how to, then that's fine. You could protect it, but like I said, like if they try to make any edits within here, right, it is going to delete out the whole thing, and so they would have to undo to get that. All right. Wonderful. We have 10 minutes left, right? And I know I like went through each of those a little fast. I'm going to open up for like questions you have.
So you can send questions to the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, I'll be able to see that and I can just call your name out. And you can ask a question. Also, Poe, I don't know if you want to see, I think Mandy put in the query that she thought would work for her question.
So
into the chat.
Right, the question was like combining the two with like teacher and that growth. And we have query. Greater than 0. Right. And so that was then combining the two where you're looking at that projection we wanted only those that were less than 3 or greater than 0 to get out the blanks, but only from Teacher John Snow. And so that works. Okay, and we have a question about a more dynamic version of copy and paste. And so I would say, yes, it is something that like, because it'll update, right? When you copy and paste things, if your original data set isn't going to stay static, right, the entire time, then this means it'll just automatically update as you update your information. So if you have sheets that you're updating every week or monthly or something like that, it'll automatically do that for you instead of you manually going back in and copying and pasting the information. Question is, can we get the presentation sent to practice querying? Yes. We'll have everything, I think, in the folder, including the recording of this.
Yes. If you scroll up to the link, there's a materials folder link. So the presentation and everything is in there. And we'll have a recording of this added to that folder as well.
So another question is, I mean, that column references in the original. So if columns change in the original data set, it's not going to change in your query. So I would be careful with changing the column order in your original data set. This is going to be most useful for data you download regularly that you're not going to like add additional. If you do add additional columns, I would add them to the end of it instead of inserting in between what you already have. Add them to the end and then you can add those right on to the new queries you build, but it's not going to automatically update your formula.
Oh, I think Rachel had a question.
Thanks. Yeah. So I work with the college team at a school, and so we want and then we have like advisors who are like the mentors to students. So is there any way to make it like a tiny bit two-way? Like, can I do it back and forth a little bit? So for example, all the things you just described make sense for us to share. Here's where kids are at with their applications, with their FAFSA, whatever, and put like, you have things missing or whatever. And then that advisor mentor can call home and like help us. But I also imagine they're going to want to like put notes in there that like speaks back to us. So can you do like the same thing where like now from this sheet, they have their own unique columns that are notes that would like speak back to our sheet, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So that can be a little more complicated because like you could add on to the query here, like, right, I mentioned that like once you make edits within the sheet, it'll delete the whole thing, right? But you could add in a column notes, except that if your original query, the original list is updated, then your notes will stay in the column and don't actually match up to, right, the actual name or anything like that. I think the way to work around that would be like in a different sheet, let's say you have that unique identifier like student ID, right? Add in notes on a different sheet and then flow that back.
Just like, yeah, like one like a separate sheet for like just the notes, which would probably be fine. So, okay.
And use that to flow it back to your original. And actually, then you would need to use a VLOOKUP, right, to back to the original.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, I think we had some questions in here. Adding additional columns to the original data set and the import range. So if you add additional columns in the original data set, the only thing you would have to go back and do for your import range, remember in import range, you listed which columns you wanted imported over, because you actually don't even have to import all the columns. You would just need to make sure this is updated. So if you're adding additional columns after you, go ahead and just update this in the formula to whatever column you want, and then it'll import that over for you. I think hopefully that answered that question. And
if it didn't and you want to clarify more, just unmute yourself and we can let you talk.
Yeah. Can you have multiple import ranges in one query or one sheet? You could import range into another one, like if you're adding new columns, but it's depending on how you want it, right? Or at the bottom, but you could import multiple, right, different sheets into the same. Some good questions. Okay, we have 3 more minutes left. If you have more questions, go ahead and still chat them or unmute yourself, any of those. In the slides, there are also some resources for you. If you want to look more into Google Sheets and the query function, there's a link there that I have found really useful. There's also like just a Google Sheets function list. There's a full function list here, and also fun to explore. There's a lot though. And then, like I said, I think everyone should have this, the Excel column or corresponding number. It's really helpful. Just hang it by your desk. And then you can also use date referencing, right? Like if you have data that is tied to dates, there's a link for date referencing, especially in your queries. And then they put the survey link in the Whova chat for you. So if you could fill out the survey, that would be wonderful. I know, because this is especially the first time we've done this as a virtual event. And I know DC Charter School Alliance is looking for a lot of feedback.
Me, I'm looking for all the feedback.
Also, my email is on here. Feel free to reach out. Like if you have questions about anything or just, you know, need a think partner or something, I'm available. You can email me. I love like working through different challenges and trying to make things like easier, right? Because that's what we want. We want to make our lives easier. And I just found that this like was one way in some projects to make life easier. And like I said, you have the slides, right? You have the answer key. You have my email, any of those things. And so hopefully you find some use with querying, have some fun with it, you know. And yeah, that is it. That's all I've got. And again, I think we'll be here for a couple more minutes. If you have any questions, again, unmute yourself or chat. But otherwise, thanks for attending, and hopefully you have a great rest of the day.